What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in true crime. It is not a tagline, it is our reality. Bryan Kohberger, Detective Phil Waters on every Friday, refers to him as the evildoer. He was in court this past Friday as Greg Scortis joins us. He was dressed in a suit, which we will discuss why, along with some hair gel and a nifty tie, whereas attorneys argued that cameras should not be allowed in the courtroom. They argue that he's actually being tried in the court of public opinion, but by what they describe as quote unquote mob justice, which is how we got to our thumbnail tonight. Police, however, do say that the killer is 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger. We want to remind everyone that Bryan Kohberger is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Best guest tonight. This is the first time you're seeing her, the first time I'm seeing her. Dr. JONI JOHNSTON. She is a forensic psychologist, a private investigator, and crime writer. As a practicing psychologist, she's worked in a medium maximum security prison for the Board of Parole for the Superior Court of San Diego, and also as a workplace investigator of misconduct allegations, including harassment, discrimination, and violence. She is the author of Serial Killers, 101 Questions True Crime Fans Ask. I wonder if I've asked all of them. I'll have to find out. She also hosts her own YouTube channel, Unmasking a Murderer. Check it out. And then we've got Greg Scortis in the house once again. Love to have him on. He was a Democrat candidate for Utah Attorney General. He has practiced law since 1982. He began his career at the Salt Lake Legal Defenders Association as a prosecutor, representing indigent defendants in criminal matters. Switched over to the criminal defense side. He is a phenomenal lawyer. He's representing the family of Eric Richins, the mother accused of murdering her husband with 5 times the legal dose of fentanyl, who I understand was just denied any kind of bail or bond and will remain in custody. Last but not least, Tara Malik, I confused it there, is an Idaho licensed attorney practicing. That happens on Mondays in state and federal court in business and commercial litigation. Tara has experience in both civil and criminal law. I definitely have a case of the Mondays. A quick reminder, please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We are at Podcast STS. That's where the show times are posted. You can once again, I'm happy to announce, find us anywhere that you listen to podcasts. We have successfully switched publishers. The chief technical officer posted, we did an amazing show. We went off the beaten path yesterday and discussed all of these new revelations related to UFOs and alien life. We had 2 amazing guests and quite the following on that last night. If you want to check out the episode, it was, as they say, out of this world. I also got yelled at quite a bit because, as you know, Sunday nights, my beautiful mother's on. People say I was too harsh. So I love you, my dear mother. However, I work hard to organize the show, and she was late, and I'm a stickler. I don't like tardiness. So I had to reprimand her. Some member of the audience decided to reprimand me instead. The merch store is also open. Without further ado, you guys know every time we discuss Bryan Kohberger, I like to start by remembering the victims in this case. So let us not forget those young lives lost way too soon. We've got Kaylee Gonzalez, 21, Madison Mogan, 21, Xana Kernodle, 20, and Ethan Chapin, 20 years old. His mother, Stacy, has a new children's book out called The Boy in Blue. So without further ado, Tara Malik, we saw Bryan Kohberger in court, and he looked different. He was in a suit and tie with gelled up hair. What is the defense doing? We've only seen him in an orange jumpsuit. So why the change now? And why are we seeing him this way? Obviously, they're trying to, transition the optics over from a person in a jumpsuit to this clean-cut looking young man.
Well, potentially. I mean, clothes can be provided by your defense attorney, and that's probably what happened here. If this case is going to go to trial, I think we've talked about it before. That jury is going to be watching his every move. They're going to be dissecting, from the minute that he walks into the courtroom until the minute he walks out. And so every time he's in the courtroom now, he's going to be on video. We're going to see that for a while as well. So it could be an attempt to just kind of start reimagining or painting kind of his image in the public.
Just so everyone knows, we're having a torrential rainstorm once again in Miami. It is rainy season, as they say. So if all of a sudden you don't see me, it's not an alien abduction, but probably a power outage. To you, Dr. Johnston, it's your first time on the show. Thanks so much for being here. It's a difficult question to answer, what I'm about to ask, but kind of your bird's eye 360 view of what you've learned so far of Bryan Kohberger. I know people, on your side of the fence, the forensic psychologist, you don't necessarily like to diagnose because he's not a patient of yours, but how do you see this person?
Well, I agree that this is somebody who has a tough road to hoe. And I also agree with Tara that, we all know that first impressions make a huge difference. And so when the jury comes in, the first thing you want them to see, if you're a defense attorney, is not somebody in an orange jumpsuit. You want to see them, looking professional, looking like a professor perhaps, or a business person. And so that's kind of understandable from a psychological standpoint why he would be wearing that. In terms of my overall impression of him, I have to say that there have been so many different things that people have said. And I think what comes through is this picture of somebody who has evolved over time, from somebody who at one point was a victim in some respects. He seemed to be a victim of bullying. He was significantly overweight. He was unhappy. He apparently made a lot of effort to kind of fit in, which he was never successful at doing. And I think over time, what you see is somebody who has morphed and really became from a victim to a victimizer. And as somebody who I think, at this point, it was kind of, disheartening to me in a way to see that some of the alleged online postings he made as a teenager, which imply to somebody who is struggling, somebody who has this visual snow, somebody who, sees himself as a sack of meat, who's extremely unhappy. And, from a psychologist standpoint, you kind of go, oh, this is somebody that you think could be helped. There could be some intervention. And then you fast forward many years ago, and you're seeing a very, very different picture. If, again, the allegations against him are true, you're somebody who's calculated, who's cold, who is interested in killing innocent people who doesn't even know. And so, to see this transformation in him, I think is really, concerning. But at this point, one of the questions I've been asked a lot is, do I think this person has killed before? My personal opinion is I don't think he has killed somebody before. But I will tell you that I think if he had been successful with these four, or if he, I don't think he'll be successful, whether he's found guilty or innocent at this point. But if somebody has the potential to kill again, absolutely, I do.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard someone say he went from victim to victimizer, but that's a good way of putting it. If in fact he is guilty of these crimes, his defense attorneys would not like the show, and we'll get into why in a moment because they're looking for a gag order. Jersey Jen Castaldi, I love this comment because she says, we love us some Tara and Greg and welcome JONI to our crazy family. It is a bit of a dysfunctional family, but we wouldn't want it any other way. And then we've got Patty Quigley, hi STS Nation from Pennsylvania. Of course, that is Bryan Kohberger's home state. Perhaps most important, Papa Bear, hello all from Moscow, Idaho. She is a friend of the show, a place that has become near and dear to our heart. Papa Bear is always here, so hello to Papa Bear. Sally Vella, Greg, just broadly speaking here, and I need to unmute you. I believe it was law enforcement investigators that wanted public participation to catch Bryan Kohberger and then say, we don't want you anymore, be quiet about it. It's just plain wrong. Sally is referring to this gag order that the judge, heard motions about on Friday. How do you respond to Sally, who makes sort of a good point, and it is a public court? Your reaction to her comment?
Well, there's two phases when you have a case like this. And one, of course, is the investigative stage. And we want as much help as we can in the investigative stage. And so it's not uncommon for law enforcement to say, hey, we've got this information. We saw this car. Did anyone see this particular model car in the area? Did any of you see any people in the area? Yeah, we want as much help as we can. But once we have an accused, once we have somebody charged with a crime, Joel, we want the jury pool to not be tainted by what they're hearing in the public. We want to be able to go to trial and have 12 jurors there in Idaho hear the case, listen to the case, and decide the case based on what evidence they hear and what is presented by the county attorney's office, and not what they think they heard on some newspaper or TV show or something like that. So no, I don't think that's untoward at all. I think it's very appropriate that law enforcement help or asks for help in the community to help them solve crimes, and then says, okay, we've got our suspect. Let's focus on that right now, and let's make sure that he gets a fair trial without undue publicity.
Well put. You got a little funky audio, Greg. Not your fault. I'm just going to keep you muted unless you're talking. There we go. Sounds like a radiator in New York City, an old school radiator hissing a little bit. Sarah. Hey, everyone. Hope you all are having a great Monday. My friend Ski Hat Sarah. And then, as I like to say, we are the future. It's tomorrow in New Zealand. Good Tuesday morning. They don't have to deal with Monday anymore. They're already over Monday. It's been a long day today. And then Shaquille Oatmeal right here, setting the law straight. Yeah, he's guilty in the court of public opinion, but not in the court of law. That is true. So there's actually some developing / breaking news. Tali joining us from the Holy Land in Israel. Bryan Kohberger's attorneys are now asking a judge for more time to decide whether or not to offer a formal alibi in the case. Ann Taylor says that the defense essentially has not had sufficient time to fully review evidence provided by the prosecution. Tara, in layman's terms, you'll unmute yourself. What does this mean in terms of, positioning themselves legally?
Well, so from the basics, an alibi is basically saying that I wasn't there, wasn't me. That's an alibi. And so there's a particular time frame in which you have to provide notice to the prosecutors to say, hey, I'm gonna make an alibi defense. I'm gonna have an alibi defense here. And the reason that you do it in advance is so it gives both sides the opportunity to fully explore this issue, including the prosecution. If they're going to explore your alibi defense, if you say that you were somewhere else and not where, at the scene of the crime, for instance, they're going to go and fully explore that issue as well. And that's why we have those time limits in there. So defense saying, hey, we need more time to figure out and to provide notice that we're going to go with an alibi defense means that they are still probably looking through that discovery. They're still trying to figure out what they've got in front of them, and they need more time to process that information before they can provide that notice to the prosecutors. What you don't want to do is to provide an alibi and then just go, oops, I guess that wasn't actually the case. That doesn't look great for anybody. So wise for the defense to take some extra time here. And especially given the voluminous discovery that I think is likely coming their way and has come their way in this case, I think it's perfectly reasonable that they're going to need some additional time.
And Dr. Johnston, to you, as I unmute you here, what do you think of this dynamic? Ann Taylor, obviously a female attorney, his lead counsel. People think that after seeing some videos, dash cam video of him at a traffic stop, that he might kind of be leading his defense team by the nose instead of, the other way around. Have you given any thought to this dynamic? And some say, obviously, with a female attorney, it might be even harder for him because he might be averse to, being told what to do by a woman. What's your take on that?
I did see a video of him being stopped by a female police officer, and there was a a lot of discussion about there being some condescension in his voice and kind of educating her about some things and those kind of things. I like to think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think anybody who took a psychology class took that, which means, you're talking about like basic food and water, and then you kind of move up the hierarchy in terms of what you focus on. I would imagine that Bryan Kohberger is really at a survival mode at this point. I mean, he knows that his life is potentially on the line. And so while he might, we don't know, prefer to have a male attorney, I don't think that's going to interfere with his communication with her and his ability to cooperate with her, because he's not a dumb guy. And I think he does understand what's at stake.
And Dr. Johnson, this came up, and I wasn't planning to ask you right now, but I'm gonna. Do you think, if he did commit these crimes, which he's accused of, that he still has that knife somewhere? Obviously, law enforcement found the sheath, but do you think that he is put that knife somewhere, thinking he was going to be able to get to it, not expecting to necessarily be in custody right now?
It'll be interesting. I don't know that I have an opinion about that. I know there were some, I think, IDs that were found after the fact at his home. And I think that lends me to think that potentially he is somebody who might hang on to information that could be potentially incriminating to him. We know that certainly there are sexually motivated killers who are often will take trophies with them, and so they can relive the murder or whatever, the sexual assault or whatever. It's interesting because in some respects, Bryan Kohberger reminds me of a kind of a sexually motivated killer, the stalking behavior, perhaps interacting with them. We're not quite sure about that. But at the same time, there's no sex that we know of at all. And so there's also this kind of, coming in and killing 4 people. So he's almost like a hybrid in a weird kind of way but he's like a serial killer in a way, in his personnel or his MO, and also like almost like a mass shooter, but he comes in and does all this kind of creates all this carnage. And so I bet that he might have the knife. Yes. And it's based primarily on behavior we've seen, like the cards. But again, this is somebody who prides himself on being this, I think, criminal mastermind in some way. And so even though clearly he's not, but because of all the mistakes that he made. And so, he may in fact have been the person. I guarantee you he knows where the knife is. Whether he threw it away or whether he put it somewhere, I think he definitely knows where it is and could retrieve it if he wanted to or could.
Yeah, which doesn't look like he's going to be able to anytime soon. Greg Skordas, back to you. Back to this notion of an alibi and not being ready to provide one yet. Ann Taylor went on to say that the evidence is just overwhelming. It includes thousands of pages. This is a quote here. It includes thousands of pages of discovery, thousands of photographs, and hundreds of hours of recordings. There's no legal precedent for an alibi, offering an alibi, as far as I know. Why is this becoming? Well, I can answer that actually, as I read about it. Idaho law provides a 10-day window typically. But can you just elaborate a little further about why this is sort of pressing at the moment?
Yeah, so in a court of law, especially in a criminal world, the defense doesn't have to prove anything. They don't have to establish anything, and they can just sit back and let the state put on their case. But if they want to offer certain what we call affirmative defenses, they have to at least give the state notice of that beforehand. And I know I'm sort of digressing a little bit here, but alibi is one of those things that the defense absolutely has to give the state notice of. They can't just bring it up during the trial. So that's something that's not usual. It's not something that we normally do as defense attorneys, show the government part of our hand. That's one of the exceptions to that. So it behooves the defense to make sure that if they're going to say, for example, that he was in New Jersey at this particular time, or he was in Boise at this particular time, they want to find out what the time was when the crime is alleged to have occurred, because it doesn't do any good to say, he was in New Jersey last Christmas, because the crime didn't occur last Christmas. So they want to learn as much as they can about the case, establish date, time, and place that the crime is supposed to have occurred, and then sit down with their client and say, where were you when that happened? And if he says, I wasn't there, or I was doing something else, then how can we establish that? How can we bolster that? How can we corroborate that? Who are the witnesses that we can bring in to establish that? And so, I think it makes sense that they would ask for a little more time to go through the voluminous evidence they have, just so they can find out exactly what the state's evidence is, rather, and what it is that they're trying to prove in terms of the exact time and date of the offense. Joel, I'm sorry. I can't hear you.
That's me. I'm sorry.
Now I can.
Now you guys can all hear me. That was all my fault. That was
I thought it was intentional. We've had enough scorers for a while.
No, I was talking to myself. That's good.
Yeah.
I muted myself because there's a weird audio glitch, but I was saying hello to my Mabel from the UK. I was saying that my beloved Mabel Rose, my puggle of 17 years, she passed away in December. So I don't want Mabel in the UK to take it the wrong way, but I was obsessed with my dog. So good to see another Mabel here joining the crew. Tara, to you, I wrote this down, and since it's Monday, completely forgot to find the exact number. If anyone at STS Nation happens to know it, I'd appreciate it. But the state had 60 days to notify the defense and the court, basically, of about whether or not they're going to seek the death penalty. That's got to be down to closer to 40 days right now, if not less at this moment. Tara, are you surprised we haven't gotten any indication one way or the other, or typically do they let the clock sort of run down on this before notifying the court about seeking the death penalty?
Oh, I'm not surprised in this scenario. I think, both sides are doing their homework as they should be. There's the exchange of discovery. So they are just getting started really on this whole discovery process. And especially if, Kohberger is asking for more time to figure out whether or not he's going to put forward an alibi defense. All of that is going to come into play on what the state does and whether or not it intends to seek the death penalty. So I would not be surprised if the state waited until, the day of or the day before to file its notice of intent. And, the other thing that happens sometimes, and I'm not saying that it's happening here, I don't know, I'm speculating, but it does happen, is the parties may be in some preliminary negotiations, right after discovery phase closes as well. And so it's not unusual for the state to delay filing a notice of intent if there's some ongoing discussions back and forth or offers being lobbed back and forth there. So obviously, in this case, the death penalty is the big ticket item as far as the state and the defense are concerned.
Bobby Henson weighing in, Bryan Kohberger, I'm the most hated man in America, Chad Daybell, hold my alcohol-free beer. By the way, tomorrow night we've got Larry and Kay Woodcock on the show along with Gigi McKelvey. They're, of course, the grandparents of JJ Vallow, and they will be here talking openly about what it was like to be part of this trial, to lose their grandson, and how they are planning to move forward. Kay Woodcock is going to be able to offer a victim impact statement. Larry Woodcock is going to be prevented from that as a ruling per a recent ruling per Judge Boyce. But Kay Woodcock will be able to, give a victim impact statement at sentencing on July 31st. So we will speak to her about that and see what they have to say. Meanwhile, look at this. Dom's mom, Dr. Joni Johnson, looks like Ashley Judd. Do you get that a lot, Dr. Johnston? Oh, you're muted now. I'm sorry. That's my fault.
Oh, but I'm always thrilled when I hear that. So whoever said that, Dom's mom, thank you so much.
It's not a bad thing to be called. Greg, back to you. In court Friday, the main purpose were motions filed by Bryan Kohberger's defense, not wanting cameras in the courtroom. They have asked Judge to keep the gag order in place. And one of the things they cited was a recent episode of Dateline as an example of quote unquote biased and intense media coverage that they claim featured a leak that got facts wrong. His lawyers went on to call some media outlets, and I quote here, a never ending circus of bad facts and worse opinions. Bad facts is a term that lawyers like to throw around. Where do you, I mean, they're blaming Dateline. I guess my question is, in your client's defense, you'd probably be doing the same thing, right? But does the public, these members of STS Nation who are paying taxes, not necessarily in the state of Idaho, do they deserve transparency, judicial transparency?
Well, you changed the whole question with the last very thing you said there. Absolutely, they do. But Joel, even as a prosecutor, I didn't like cameras in the courtroom, and I'll tell you why. You've got jurors there, and they're trying to hear the case, and they're trying to learn about the case, and they go home at night, and they can't help but talk to people or watch the news, and even if they're told not to. So, to the extent that we can keep that. Keep the jury as sanitized as possible from outside sources so that they decide the case based on the evidence that they hear at the trial. And we did that in the Lori Vallow case. The judge did that in the Lori Vallow case, and I think it was quite effective. We didn't have a lot of outside influence. I mean, the media was crazy down there in Ada County at the courthouse every day, but the members of the jury wouldn't have necessarily been aware of that because the judge didn't allow even same day transcripts from the trial. It was really a fairly good way to do that. And I think that especially in smaller rural jurisdictions where you're going to have a hard enough time getting a jury pool that's not already tainted by the case, that makes sense to keep it as closed as possible. And both from the defense side and the prosecution side, I'm surprised the prosecution isn't joining this. And maybe they are, but I would think everybody would want to keep this trial. And I know you're talking about the public's right to know. They have the right to know. They absolutely have the right to know when the trial's over. We'll tell them everything they need to know. But right now, let's try to keep it as clean as we can for the jury.
And touche, Greg, because you had us going until the very end there, that they have the right to know until after the trial. So
right.
They're not going to be pleased to hear that. Megan Baldwin, to you, Tara. Do you think the evidence is so overwhelming, which is why they are keeping everything sealed, why everything is sort of under lock and key? Your response to this comment from Megan?
Good question, Megan. No, I don't think that it's that the evidence is overwhelming, but this is part of the process. And if you were following kind of the Lori Daybell or Lori Vallow case, same thing. We were hearing things as they occurred kind of in trial. We were learning more pieces of evidence that we didn't know before. So not unusual to not release all of the evidence. That kind of release of evidence occurs during the discovery process. And then again, it gets filtered at trial because you can only introduce certain types of evidence at trial. You have to follow the rules of evidence there. So I think that there's a lot of evidence. I think that there's a lot of circumstantial evidence. They have a lot of data as well, but I wouldn't read into any sort of delay as being, they've got an overwhelming amount. We don't do trials by, guerrilla warfare. You kind of have to lay your cards on the table before you go to trial.
Carrie G saying, I love the extraterrestrial episode. It wasn't just a hokey episode about aliens. We had some real experts on. It was actually really fascinating. If even a part of this is true, this whistleblower yesterday said that the United States government is in possession of non-human origin spacecraft, and more than hinted that the U.S. government is also in possession of some alien beings. Greg Skordas is laughing, but time will tell. It would be the biggest news story in all the world, so we'll find out. Tiff Knox says, we know you love Carm, Joel. I hope she's listening. She is, I'm sure. She was busy getting her nails done today as she gets ready to go. She's going to the Holy Land. She's going to Israel for the summer. By the way, we're going to have to start doing Coffee with Carm on Sundays. We're going to have to switch Sunday lives to like 10 in the morning. So my dear mother can join, and I can mute her at times, as Misdemeanor is suggesting here. Wendy saying hello to STS Nation. And Shaq referring to the story that Greg has been all over. I'm sure Corey Richins is not happy about having to stay in jail until her trial. She didn't seem too pleased yesterday. I bet you Greg's not too upset about that. And El Rose, Carm was awesome about the aliens. I'd love to hear more about the neighbor. We will definitely get back to that topic. To you, Dr. Johnston, one of the things defense attorneys were arguing about is social media. And some people who are in the business of doing what I do, hosting YouTube channels. They cite research on media coverage by Jean Saucier of TrueScope, a media intelligence company. They plan to call her. They called her, I suppose, as a witness on Friday to testify about social media amplifying negative stories about Bryan Kohberger. I have a two-part question for you. Let's start with what is the impact of social media on stories like this? Is it just making things worse? Is it amplifying stories, or is it giving more people a voice? How do you see it?
I think it's both. I mean, I think with, social media really is how you use it. And so I think on the one hand, it gives people a way to stay connected, to know what's going on, to follow current news, to offer their opinion. I think there's a lot of good things about social media. I've seen a lot of true crime, I guess, aficionados who become much more safety conscious, who become much more involved in, if you see something, say something. So there's a real positive side of the media. The flip side of that is, and I can understand this from an attorney perspective, is that you are going to get a lot of armchair detectives, armchair attorneys, prosecutors, defense attorneys who are not really, attorneys at all. And so they are going to magnify the stories. And it's going to, it's just going to, what might have been a local story, although not in this case, just blows up. And, the worst case scenario is when you have somebody who's basically accusing somebody who's completely innocent of being the perpetrator and, getting then sued for, I guess, defamation. So it's a mixed deal. I don't think it's the social media that's the problem, it's how it's used.
Good point. A good distinction there. My second question to you is, there's a couple thousand people watching this live right now, and when it's all said and done, there'll be, probably somewhere between 20 and 30,000. Why are people so invested in true crime? I'm one of many, many channels, one of many, many shows. There seems to be an appetite for so many of them. Why are people so focused on true crime? Is it kind of this human desire to solve a mystery? How do you see it?
Well, I think there's a couple of different reasons, and I can speak for myself first because I was certainly a true crime follower long before I became a forensic psychologist. I kind of grew up reading a lot of books. I read Helter Skelter when I was a teenager. My mom used to watch all the old shows, Mannix and Columbo and all those shows. So I think there is kind of this natural desire and curiosity in all of us to kind of see mysteries, be involved in mysteries, and potentially solve mysteries. I think that's one part of it. Then I think there's also kind of this vicarious adrenaline that we get a lot of times from reading these cases. It provides us, it's almost like reading a scary story. And it's obviously not that. It's much more serious than that. These are human lives, and it can be easy to forget the victims and their families because, it is like a story to people who are on the outside, oftentimes looking in. It's very different being on the inside looking out. Then I think there is also this sense of, what I understand I can control. Does that make sense? We all want to feel like we have control over our lives and our environment. So there is, I think, this curiosity of understanding why people do bad things. And maybe if I understand it well enough, I can prevent it from happening to me.
And just while I have you, William M., we get this a lot. Kohberger has killer in all caps written all over him. Is there anything, I've asked this many times about kind of like the dead eyes, the shark eyes. Do killers have some sort of uniform, common denominator look, or do they come in all shapes, sizes, colors, creeds? How do you answer, William M.?
I can tell you from my perspective, I don't know if I've interviewed 1,000 violent offenders at this point, but I spend a lot of time with them. And I have met some that I felt like, I hope I don't ever meet this person in a dark alley because of the way they looked. And I have met some that I felt like, if the circumstances were different, we might be friends. So I'm not a body language expert. You have experts who say, oh, look at the shifty eyes, or look at the number of blinks, or those kinds of things. Like I said, I've met, very violent offenders, murderers all over the board. So I think this idea that we can spot a killer, or people who don't spot a killer somehow overlook something that everybody else would see, is a myth.
Back to my friend Tara Malik here. Defense lawyers pointed specifically to a social media post. They were picking on Nancy Grace and an episode of Law and Crime Sidebar, where, speaking of body language, Kohberger's body language was analyzed, I guess, ad nauseum. His attorneys call this a pseudoscience, which would not make Susan Constantine happy. We have her on here a lot, and she is a behavior expert. And they also cited the Lori Valadaybell case to support their argument against cameras. A pretrial hearing that had a camera trained directly on Valadaybell led to her lawyers asking that cameras not be allowed. So they pointed to that as well. Tara, I mean, is it the job of defense attorneys here to look for everything example-wise that's out there that portrays a defendant in a bad light to say, hey, look, we don't want this to happen to our client?
Well, their job is to defend their client and make sure that, the client gets the fairest trial that, they can ensure. So they are going to be looking at other examples, and they're going to be looking and pointing out where the system has flaws in it, or another case where there have been flaws exposed because of the way it was handled. So, they've got to look, they have to have a 360 view of this case. And that includes from the media as well, and what that looks like, and what cameras in the courtroom, that presence means too. So I'm not surprised that they're picking out those examples, but cameras in the courtroom have had a really long history. I know I've said it before on the show, but even dating back to the O.J. Simpson trial, there were cameras in the courtroom. And I think that there are certain ways that you can place rules around where they can be and how they can be and what they're seeing, what the viewpoints are, not to have it, in someone's face, but it can go both ways. It can cut both ways. It can be an annoyance and a distraction. It can definitely up the game for prosecutors and defense attorneys. At the same time, it can do, what the defense attorneys in the O.J. Simpson case were saying. Both the prosecution and the defense wanted cameras in that case for different reasons. The prosecution was like, we want everybody to know that this was a fair trial and that, he was guilty. And the defense team said, when he is acquitted, we want everybody to know that it was all on the table and it was a fair trial and that he walks out of here a free man without any stigma attached to him. So times have changed.
Well put. Casey Boston, please tell me you're going to ask Greg Skordas about Corey Richins' hearing today. So I'm going to ask Greg Skordas about Corey Richins' hearing today. It's not me, Greg. It's them. Do you have a comment? Do you have a response?
Joel, it would take weeks. I was there. It was 4 hours just to decide whether and to what extent she would be detained between now and the time of her trial. I've never seen a detention hearing, a bail hearing, go 4.5 hours until today. It was something very, very interesting. We learned a lot about the case, but Kohberger is probably just more interesting today. Corey Richins is that. I mean, I'll go back to something the doctor said when we're talking about people, but you've got this Bryan Kohberger, you've got Corey Richins, you've got Lori Vallow, and I think the reason why the public is so interested in these type of cases is because they are the person next door. It's not like you see them and boy, that person's a killer. I mean, these are people that could have been sitting next to you at the movie theater the other night, or could have been, you could have helped them when they came into your restaurant or something. I mean, what's interesting is that these are the reason why I think the public's so fascinated by these kind of cases is because they're your next door neighbor who suddenly does something that's just completely out of whack. And the public is like, how does that happen? Or how do I know that's not going to be my neighbor someday? So I think there's something. We can't just go down and walk the dark alleys and say that's a good person and that's a bad person. I've practiced law for 41 years and I like to think I can do that. but you can't. You just can't do that. And it's hard, and it really does create a lot of public interest when you have somebody. And this Bryan Kohberger is a nice looking young man. I mean, he looks like he could have been your banker, and now he's accused with 4 homicides. So you just don't know what's underneath.
Back to you, Dr. Johnston. Commercial Zone says, obviously referring to your earlier comment, victim to victimizer. Wait, when was the trial? This is being said facetiously, like, you're convicting them, but it's, but, how do you stop human nature and people like us from talking about a hideous crime? This is obviously the point that the defense is trying to make, but people are going to comment. That's just human nature, isn't it, Doctor?
Well, and I'm glad Commercial Zone chimed in there. I appreciate that, Commercial Zone, because what I was actually referring to was talk with several of his high school classmates who talked about him having this long history of pretty significant bullying, being a very overweight kid. And then apparently in his senior year in high school, he lost like 130 pounds. And from, several of the friends that have kind of come public, they've said it was amazing that his personality changed. Not just in terms of appearing to have more confidence, but just becoming much more aggressive, even with his friends. And so there were people who said, this is the person who, used to be bullied horribly. And now when he lost his weight and started, because he became vegan and was working out all the time, he became aggressive and became a bully himself. So I didn't mean that in the sense of like, yeah, this person has not been convicted in a court of law. So whether he is the ultimate victimizer in terms of having murdered 4 people, that has to be determined. But there are people who have come forward and said that this person did, once he lost all this weight and some other things happened, became aggressive and became kind of a bully himself.
Grunge Truck says 4 deaths in his first crime is quite a lot if this is in fact his first crime. And we don't know. We're waiting to find and hear all this evidence. Sarah Ann, as I like to say, better than crack cocaine, addicted to STS, best podcast ever. Stay addicted. We like your addict type. So please hang on and continue to watch the show. Sharp Tack says, my sister was viciously bullied for years and never killed anyone. We all have the ability to choose not to harm others, especially those who are innocent. What about the notion, Dr. Johnston, of free choice? My father passed very recently, was a psychiatrist for 40 some odd years and was a big believer in free choice. He wrote a book called Humanistic Psychiatry: From Oppression to Choice. Do we all have that within us to make the right decisions? I told my 9-year-old daughter when she went to sleepaway camp, you can be smart or you can be stupid. Choose to be smart. Those were my final words to her. She looked at me like I was an alien. But what about Dr. Johnston?
I absolutely think that we have free choice. I think some people are born with the odds highly stacked against them, with their environment and probably with the genetics as well. I don't think Bryan Kohberger, from what we know about his family, was one of them. He seems like somebody who had a very caring family, who was very involved with him, was very nurturing to him. And so this is not, and the other part of it, I'm so glad that this is coming up, is because, I do some mitigation evaluations, which is when you're going and you're basically saying, this is a person who's been convicted. Now he's up for sentencing. And my job is to tell this person's life story. It's not to excuse the crime that he has committed or she has committed. This person has already been found guilty in a court of law. It is to say, okay, let me try to paint a picture that helps people understand how he got from birth, basically, up to the point where he is now. Now, what the jury does with that is completely up to them. So it's not to lie or put a spin on it and say, oh yeah, this person was bullied, so therefore we shouldn't care that he killed 4, innocent people, or that he became a bully himself, because you're absolutely right. There are plenty of people who had horrible experiences as children, and not only did not repeat that, they became more empathic. They became advocates for people who had been bullied. So it's not just your life experience. It's oftentimes kind of the genetic loading you bring to that life experience. It's the amount of support you have with that life experience. It's how you interpret that life experience, and then how you use that life experience going forward.
Well put. Janice, I'm not going to even attempt her last name. It's called an opinion, and everyone is allowed to have one. That's as far as it goes. The courtroom is where innocent or guilty is proven and has to be followed by law after that is determined. Shaquille Oatmeal responding, saying the gag order is useless and pointless. You cannot silence the whole country. Craziness. I think it's sort of inevitable that there's going to be a lot of talk about this case, and you can't stop that. Nightwood says, notice one of Corey Richens' lawyers, don't recall her name is Sky Lazaro. She's been a guest on the show. We have all the best guests. She was on just last week discussing Lori Vallow, and Greg Skordas himself has said she is a fine attorney. And she brought a lot to the table when we were discussing Lori Vallow. However, she is not discussing that case right now, but promised me, by the way, that she's going to come to me first. We'll see if that happens when Dateline in 2020 go after her. But we'll work to get her and Greg on as soon as she's able to speak. And this is a comment that his defense team would not like. I'm good with whatever Bryan Kohberger wears to court, as long as he doesn't bring a knife. Tara Malik. There's a defense attorney who works with Ann Taylor. His name is Jay Weston. And I quote here, he says that the media of 2023 is not a good place to go. We're trying to resolve issues, not make them worse. Said the push by the media is to show in every possible way that the state has it right. This is their guy. And the question is how long until we get him to the firing squad? It is grotesque. It's a pretty harsh analysis of the media, calling it grotesque. If you were filing these motions, I don't know, would you get that harsh, I guess, with the media?
I mean, I wouldn't personally go that far. I mean, I think, there is a natural curiosity, but also, this is a trial by jury. The public has the right to know what's going on in their criminal justice system. And I understand that. And I understand the desire of the media to report, things that are of importance to the communities in which we live. So, I don't think it's particularly fair to characterize it as, some grotesque exercise. I think what it is a community that has been really traumatized by some vicious events and a really heinous crime and a murder and the loss of 4 really innocent lives. And understandably, people want to know, what's happening in the criminal justice system and who, if anyone, is going to be held accountable for that. So I wouldn't go as far as that.
Tali in Israel, Dr. Johnson, lately all I see is that the public opinion has shifted and there's more people that think he is not guilty than guilty. The media will be the media, even if you gag everything and take the cameras. Have you seen any kind of shift? I don't know that I've seen a shift that's big, that is that big, but there are a lot of quote unquote cyber sleuths and people who host certain YouTube channels, that are espousing all these other theories, that it's a drug house, it was a drug deal gone bad. There's a million different theories, but have you seen this shift? And again, it's, it's like trying to stop a tsunami. It's difficult to do, with like a block of wood once it gets going, right?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I haven't seen a shift, meaning, the public opinion used to be here and now it's shifted over here. I think there is, though, a significant minority, and they're very vocal, who have kind of taken on this as a cause. We think Bryan Kohberger's interest is innocent, or we think he's being railroaded, or he's being unfairly treated in the media, or all of the above. And they are kind of taking that approach and pushing that forward. So, yeah, I don't know that I would see it being a shift, but I definitely see this, minority of very vocal supporters that are, kind of becoming louder and louder.
Greg, Sally Vella has a question that I think a lot of people who are not in your profession or law enforcement wonder about, which is why she's asking it. After they catch a suspect, don't they still need to continue gathering evidence from the public to do a full investigation? That is correct, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's correct, but the prosecution can't file a case, Joel, until they reach this threshold where there is a reasonable certainty that they're going to win. So in theory, they don't need to do any more investigation, or they shouldn't have brought their case in the first place. When I was a prosecutor, I used to have police officers come to me all the time and say, hey, Greg, I really need you to file this case, and we'll put it together if you'll just give us a warrant so we can arrest him. And I'd say, no, you don't get to do that. You've got to have your case together. So yeah, you can still gather evidence, and they probably will gather evidence, and they should, as it comes in from the public, from other sources. But they better have their case together right now, the day they filed charges against him, especially because, as we've been talking about here, it's a capital offense. It's an aggravated murder. It could very well, if Idaho chooses, carry the death penalty. It doesn't get any more serious than that. Mm-hmm. So this was a quadruple homicide, and the state cannot afford to file a case like this, of this magnitude, and have it tossed out at the early stages and go, hey, you guys didn't have your act together. That just can't happen. So one thing that's really troubling about this case, and I think it follows that question, Joel, is that we don't know a lot about what the evidence the state has. In some of these other cases, they've issued these probable cause statements or preliminary hearings, or in Lori Vallo's case, we heard the trial. It's like, whoa, the state's case is much more compelling than we thought. I think we know just the tip of the iceberg about what investigators and prosecutors know about Kohberger right now. And I think the public just needs to sit back and say, okay, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. If they've got their case, let them put it before a jury.
Jersey Jen Castaldi from my home state. Joel, you sound tired, my brother. Monday, which you spelled wrong, by the way, because you're tired, is almost over. You go this. You got that wrong, too. You got this. But I get what you're saying. Jersey Jen, I don't want to bore the audience right now. My mother's going to be screaming out loud to herself. Saturday, I was dragged to a 3-hour, almost. My wife wanted to take the kids to a movie, so we took them to see Transformers, which I thought was a cartoon. I was pleased to find out it was not animated, but had some real people in there. She thought it would be a good idea to go an hour and a half to the 4D movie theater, which is like sitting in a roller coaster. If you guys have never been to a 4D movie theater, go, and you'd be glad that I warned you, because people who don't know what they're in for, they start screaming, they go crazy. The seats rock back and forth. When you go in water, the chair sprays you with water, gets all over your popcorn. So that was Saturday. And then Sunday, I had to drive to Fort Lauderdale, which is north, to take my lovely daughter to a chartered flight for her summer camp, to go to summer camp. And then I had to go pick my other daughter up about 3 million miles south of that. And then my wife thought it'd be a good idea to force me to go to someone's pool party who I didn't know. And then just generally speaking, right now, my mom is literally yelling at me, even though I can't hear her. Sunday night, I'm an anxious guy, if you haven't figured it out. I worry on Sunday nights about all the things that can go wrong in the world. And that carries over to Monday. By tomorrow, I'll be fine. I'll be back to my old usual self. Sorry for the long explanation, but yeah, Tara, I don't understand why this. I don't. Everyone's looking at me like I'm an alien. I don't understand why this case is called different. There were plenty of high-profile trials with different outcomes at the end, regardless of its high publicity. You can have cameras and maintain decorum. I mean, you mentioned OJ. We've seen plenty of high-profile, although that trial was a disaster from the judge's point of view. But it is possible to maintain decorum and have a high-profile trial, isn't it, Sarah?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, you're right. It wasn't the OJ case. The way that the judge especially handled that case was not a good example of how you should handle media in a courtroom. I mean, it turned into, as everyone saw, kind of a 3-ring circus. But, as the judge, yes, you can put rules in place and figure out, what you think would meet all the goals. And the goals in this situation would be, making sure that the jury's focus is, like was mentioned before, is on the testimony that's coming in, especially if you have a lot of data and really intricate evidence that's circumstantial that they need to piece together, chain of evidence, that type of thing. Making sure that the camera isn't in the face of the defendant the whole time, things like that. So I think that we're starting to kind of feel out the appropriateness of cameras in the courtroom and where and when it's appropriate and starting to draw some of those boundaries there. I don't know that there's one recipe that kind of fits all situations. But, you know, I get it. I've also been a prosecutor, and it's nerve-wracking when you know you've got the burden of proof in a case, and when all eyes are on you, and then you add a camera on top of it, and you know it's going to be streamed out in the world live. It's a different level of pressure as well.
And Dr. Johnson, back to you. So there were, lawyers from media outlets there to push for cameras. But then there was another attorney named Shannon Gray. He's actually the attorney for the Gonzalez family, Kaylee Gonzalez. And he was asking the judge to amend the gag order to allow him to speak publicly on behalf of his clients. Kaylee's birthday was this past Thursday. She would have turned 22. Obviously an emotional time. We'll get into some of the Instagram posts from her sister in just a minute. But from a victim standpoint, how important is it for them to be able to speak? Right now, Greg is representing the family of this young man that was allegedly poisoned by this mother in Utah. And Greg is, speaking. I don't know if he's able to speak quite as much as he had in the past, but how important is it for the victims' families to have a voice here?
I think it's really important. They have had control over nothing since all this happened. They had no control over what happened to their child, no control of the investigation, understandably. Limited information, it sounds like, which again is understandable. And I think it must feel, like another sense of just being out of control or having no control of your life, not to be able to at least speak about their daughters or their son, to commemorate a birthday as it comes up, talk about the memories and those kinds of things. And so I think that while I certainly understand the pros and cons of having a camera in the courtroom or having a gag order on the prosecutor and defense or those kind of things, I do, from a psychologist standpoint, not an attorney standpoint, kind of feel for these family members who are saying, we want to be able to talk. It will help us to be able to talk to the media and give interviews and talk about our daughters or our son. I think that would be, I don't know that it's going to heal them right now, but it certainly is a part of them having a sense of, I can at least shape the narrative as much as possible around my child and who he or she was and what we want as a family to happen.
Dory writes, Greg Scortis, this one's for you here. Are we sure he got a fair arrest, a fair constitutional arrest? I think we should worry about that before we worry about a fair jury trial, or at least worry about them equally. As people can recall, when he was arrested, he asked if anyone else was arrested, and shortly thereafter said he'd be exonerated. Greg, legally, what does it even mean to have a fair arrest? Obviously you've got to have Miranda rights read and all that, but what does that consist of?
Well, it simply means that the government had what they call probable cause to believe that you committed a crime. That's a fairly low standard. I mean, police can arrest based on probable cause. Now that standard's quite low, but when you get to a jury and you have to prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt, that's a significantly different thing. So for the police officers to arrest this man, they must have felt that they had a case, that they had probable cause to believe he committed the crime. Maybe not enough to charge him yet. Maybe they had significant evidence to charge him at that point. But it's a fairly low standard. And as we progress through the system, you'll see the preliminary hearing where we have another probable cause determination. But that's always seen as a higher standard for the government. And then, of course, you have your trial where it's something more. So if it was an illegal arrest, I guess he can challenge it. Of course, they don't just unarrest people because they don't feel like they should have been arrested in the first place. That rarely happens. But I can assume, Joel, that the police had done their homework, that they had at least some cause to believe he was involved in this crime, probable cause. And once they have that, they can go hook him up. They may have to release him again down the road after they find out that he's not the right person. You can unarrest, but you can arrest based on a fairly low standard of proof.
And there you go, 41 years of experience explaining that to you. Fragile Stick says, and this is precisely what the defense does not like, this comment right here, give the evildoer a K-bar instead of a firing squad just for general principle. Obviously, everything has to play out in the court of law. Mona, I'm glad you asked. What did I miss? Synopsis, anyone? Yes. Aliens have invaded, and our time here is limited. So enjoy the show. enjoy true crime. Soon, none of this will matter. They are here. If you guys didn't see that Vegas footage, body cam footage from Las Vegas, the guy who called in the alien call, watch it tonight. You might not sleep very well, but it's interesting, and I have no idea what's going on. This was always a joke. You know what else was a joke? Doomsday preppers were a joke until the pandemic came and everyone was freaking out and you couldn't get toilet paper and you couldn't get all that stuff. And suddenly people were like, wow, these guys had some foresight. So my days of making fun or poking fun or whatever are over, because I'm expecting a neon illuminated green person to walk by my home at any moment. But that's just me. Latah County Prosecutor Tara Malik, to you. It's Bill Thompson. He's been there a long time. He said about all this that I'm just going to defer to the court's quote unquote sound discretion. So that's one thing I want to ask you about. And then Judge, his comments were a little bit harsh. He says that there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there that is concerning. He went on to basically say that the local media, which is often the case, is covering this in the best possible way. He was, kind of going after national media more, saying that there was too much speculation, too much criticism, too much bad information that would trigger for any lawyer to try to protect the integrity of the investigation and the future court process. But first, to the first part of that from Mr. Thompson, Bill Thompson, what about the fact that he's just kind of going to, abide by whatever the judge comes up with in terms of saying that sound discretion is what he is going off of? Is that what you would expect?
I mean, I think it's kind of a punt. It's what it is. I mean, the judge always has discretion in this area, in this arena, on this particular question for sure. So it's, the judge is ultimately going to be the one to make the call on what rules the parties are going to have to follow, outside of the rules of evidence and just general procedure, what rules the parties are going to have to follow here when this goes to trial and throughout this case. So, by saying I leave it up to your discretion, you're basically saying, look, I don't really have a strong opinion one way or another, Judge. You make the call. We'll live with it. It's fine. I'm not going to, I'm keeping my powder dry for another day and another fight, essentially. Yeah. So that's on that first part of your question. That's what I would say. And then remind me of your second part.
The second was basically just the judge blasting national media, saying there's just too much misinformation. He's pretty harsh, saying local media is doing an okay job, but the rest of you guys are basically just turning this into what kind of show.
Yeah, I mean, everyone is, I think one of the commentators said this before, viewers said this before, it's like everyone's kind of entitled to their own opinion. You've got limited control. Once you put information out into the open, you don't have any control on how that's going to be used or twisted or turned. And certainly there are situations where there are repercussions like, defamation suit or a slander or libel type of suit. But, once it's out there, it's out there. And I don't know how I think it's part of a bigger kind of more philosophical discussion on, how much access to information, maybe that's the question, how much access to information should we be giving people in these types of cases that are true crime that, we know garner a lot of interest and, speculation and so on and so forth. Because the way that we've approached it, historically has been people should have access to the courthouse. They should have access to information. They should have access to the judicial process and system. So I understand the judge's concerns, and I'm not saying that, his concerns are unwarranted or, at all. But what I'm saying is it's really hard to control information once you put it out there.
Megan Baldwin weighing back in, and alibi should be the easiest part of this case if truly innocent. And then Greg, to this, from Kelly K, making the points for the defense team here. If you had a legit alibi or ally, wouldn't you have said so by now? Why more time needed to come up with someone who will lie for him? We're talking about a legal tactic in terms of an alibi, not necessarily an alibi that me, you, or Kelly might think of. Is that right, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, of course it is. And his attorneys are smart to wait and get as much evidence as possible and sit down with him and say, here's, you need to tell us where you were at the time this occurred, what you were doing, how we can show that you in fact couldn't have committed this crime. I mean, that's what an alibi is all about. That, hey, I wasn't even there. I mean, I couldn't have committed the crime because it wasn't something that I was present for. It would have been impossible for me to commit it. So, I don't fault the defense or the defendant or the judge for giving more time to make sure that they can get that alibi together. I mean, 10 days is actually a very short time. I know some states, including ours, you have to give your notice of alibi at least 30 days before the trial. It can be a year after you're charged. So that's a fairly short leash, and I think it makes a lot of sense because we don't all know where we were, Joel, a year ago today. I mean, it's not something you can just pull out of the air. So, okay, where was I on this particular date at this particular time? What was I doing, and how can I establish that? That's a fair analysis for a judge and defense attorneys to want to have, and it's something that will create a fair trial.
Greg, neither here nor there, but 41 years. Any plans to ever retire? I see all those mounds of paper behind you. You still love what you're doing and plan to keep doing it?
Don't say this in front of my wife, Joel, because she wants me to retire yesterday. I still like it. I'm still having fun. 41 years is too long to do anything. It's absolutely too long to do anything. I mean, on Medicare, I don't have to work, but I like it. It's fun. I thoroughly enjoy people like the four of us here. I mean, you've got some incredible guests tonight. If I could do this every night, I would retire tomorrow.
Well, maybe I'll start a YouTube channel with you and I'll have you retire. That way your wife will like me and we'll get you out of the office. My whole thing, I see those piles of paper and I was always a news guy. I was always on deadline. There's always adrenaline, live television. If I had to read that much paperwork, I just don't know how I'd be able to stay awake. But Greg, I give you.
I'm old school. I'm old school, Joel. I don't use computers. I don't go to these. I mean, Tara, she probably has everything on a thumb drive. I couldn't create a thumb drive or read a thumb drive if I had to. I have smart people like Tara that work for me that can open a thumb drive, that can find things. I had to get somebody from my office to log me into the show tonight because I couldn't find the link. That's why I was late. I mean, I don't even want to change. I'm too old. I can't be smart like Tara. It's long past me.
It's interesting you bring that up. Once again, my mother is going to scream. I can hear her voice in my head. She lives rent free, as they say in my head. But I am writing the book about her. I have this book deal, and we just finished up a chapter on technology. What's incredible, my mom is a young, almost 84. Greg is a very young, whatever he is. But even I had Pascal in high school in 1980. I had to cheat off of Steve Isakoff, who went to Princeton undergrad and Harvard and got his MD, PhD. Without Steve Isakoff, I never would have passed that class. But no one even knows. I mean, Tara Malik has never heard of Pascal. I can guarantee you that. Have you, Tara? No, right?
No.
Yeah, there's no cell phones. When I was in college, I used to handwrite papers and bring them to a typist. So I'm really like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. But my mother was born in a part of Yugoslavia. There were no cars. She had horse and buggy and a radio, and that's it. And now there's ChatGPT. So it's just crazy how the world has changed. And in this chapter in the book, it's just funny. She talks about it and how she deals with it. But I'm kind of with Greg on this, except for having to read mounds of paper. That would not be fun for me. To you, digressing a little bit here. I'm coming back to life on Monday is almost over, but Dr. Johnston, to you, and you do look a little like Ashley Judd, I have to say. So whatever that's worth. Kaylee Gonzalez's 22nd birthday was last week. She has a younger sister named Autumn, and she posted, "Happy birthday, Sissy. I love you so much. I wish we could feel one more hug, see one more smile, and hear one more "I love you." She went on to say, and this is super sad, "You deserve your life more than anyone I know. You worked so hard for everything you had, and you loved your life. You appreciated all the little things, and that's a big deal. So many people are so blessed and they don't appreciate it, but that was never you. You appreciated it all. Learning to live without you is the hardest thing I've ever had to do, something I should never have had to do." Um, these crimes, people don't really think about it, but they affect a generation of people. It's like throwing a pebble into a pond. It's a ripple effect, and it's going to affect these families and generations of them for time to come, right?
It will. I think whenever people experience something like this, which is hard to even imagine as a mom as well as a psychologist, I mean, it definitely, nobody's the same after this. It doesn't mean that they can't be different and be happy and find a way to make meaning out of this and move forward. But I can't imagine that anybody is, and not like you said, not just this generation, but generations to come, it will shape in some respects this family or these families going forward. And all of us to some extent, for those of us who are moms, those of us who are dads. It's so funny. I've got a 22-year-old daughter and a 28-year-old son, which is kind of interesting that we have, Bryan Kohberger was 28 and, and it's just, it's unfathomable to think about either scenario, to think about your son who you love and, doing something like that and thinking about his future or lack thereof and just, what have I done wrong? And all the things that parents go through on a daily basis anyway. And then to think about losing your daughter to such a horrendous circumstance. I mean, I think that's one of the many reasons why this case has affected so many people of different ages.
You look too young to have a 28 and a 22-year-old. Hey, Mona says, love Tara and her AstroTurf wall. I love that as well. I tell her that often.
Yeah, that's cool. Very cool.
Thank
Tara,
you.
to you, taking off your legal hat and putting on your Instagram hat, and I know you love you love to be on Insta. I see you on there. Autumn also shared on this Insta post part of a journal that Kaylee wrote. And Kaylee wrote this to herself. She said, "The most important thing for me to realize is that I am setting these goals as a lifestyle change. So no set and date." She wrote a list of intentions to grow a relationship with God, to make healthier behavioral choices, and to focus on her loved ones. Just from a human standpoint, can you relate to this? I mean, just a person, talking about their life in front of them. You've got, obviously, a little bit younger, you've got friends who are exceeding in their professions, and suddenly to have your life cut short like that emotionally, this is tough to read, isn't it?
Oh, it's really tough to read. It's absolutely tragic. I mean, I think, it doesn't matter whether you're the prosecutor or a defense attorney on any case. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not lost on you that, in these types of cases, there is a significant loss of life. And the younger, the more, heart-wrenching it is, truly. And so to read something like that, about the hopes and aspirations and dreams and intentions that she had, her focus on family moving forward in a more meaningful or intentional way, it absolutely breaks your heart, and when you're in that role of being the attorney, you've got a job to do, both on the prosecution and on the defense side. The defense attorney has to assure that the process that we have and that we follow when we're going to convict someone is a fair process, and it gives them all opportunities to present any sort of defense. And, the prosecution side, it has a high burden for a reason. We don't want to convict the wrong people of crimes, but certainly not lost, the end of a young life like this.
See where we go. Papa Bear has a comment. I'm not going to bring it up because I want to keep Adam's comment up. But she says, in Idaho, and Papa Bear is from Moscow, Idaho. In Idaho, Ann Taylor is known as a tough, assertive attorney. My best guess is she's not going to allow anyone she's representing to run the show or push the narrative. This goes back to earlier about Kohberger potentially leading her by the nose. Papa Bear says no way. Greg, back to you here from Adam Bluefire in Barcelona, Spain. Do you think the law and judges pandered too much to defendants prior to their trial for fear of later reprisals legally? Too much attention goes to the wrongdoers and little to victims' families. Is there a case to be made for this? Is that just the way the law is set up?
Maybe both. I mean, I remember when I was a prosecutor, I always thought that. I mean, the grass is always greener on the other side. When I was a prosecutor, I thought, man, these judges, they just bend over for the defendants on everything, and they really put the state to do so much more work. And now, of course, I'm on the other side. I feel like, well, you know, the judges pretty much give the state everything they want, and it's neither of those are true. It's just a matter of perspective. I mean, we select these people to be judges because they're fair, because they don't want to try this case again. So sometimes they will err on the side of the defense to make sure that the defendant is treated fairly. I don't have any problem with that. That's the system we live in. You know, if the government loses, they don't appeal. When the defense loses, he or she may go to prison for the rest of their lives, and so they have the right to appeal. So we want to make sure that all of their rights are protected, even if it appears that they're more protected than not. And I will still say this, Joel, and I think maybe both of my guests would agree. In America in 2023, the government still wins by far the majority of cases they take to trial. It's not like defendants win 50% of their trials. In federal court, it's something like the government wins something like 85 or 90%. So judges can do what they want, but prosecutors typically bring good cases. Judges make sure everything's treated fairly, and defendants sometimes win and sometimes lose. That's the beauty of the jury system. So I don't really think that there's a bias with judges to favor one side or the other. I haven't seen that.
And I think some of that comes down to money, because the federal government's got endlessly deep pockets, right?
Mm-hmm.
A couple of things coming Dr. Johnston's way here. Adam Bluefire, to you, Dr. JONI, do you think there is a sexual thrill component to the killings? Did he actually somehow get a kick out of it? Is there a disorder of violence and sex combined?
Just a couple of different questions here. I'll try to break down kind of one at a time. I think that probably the easiest one to answer is the middle one, which is there a kind of disorder of sex and violence. And yeah, that's called sexual sadism, basically, you know, which is when somebody gets sexual pleasure from inflicting pain or torturing somebody else. And it's a situation where sex and violence kind of get fused and connected in some way. And that there's, you know, I could spend way too much time kind of trying to explain that. I think it's interesting, this issue of Bryan Kohberger, and was there a sexual component, even though there was no, you know, sex involved that we know of at this point. There have been people who said, oh, the stabbing was kind of a substitute for rape or whatever, which, you know, may or may not be the case. We could argue that. I think there is, though, something sexual about that in terms of the stalking that he did and the victims he chose. That does make me think there is some sexual component to that. Also, some of his behavior prior to that. In terms of, you know, going in, if there's been some allegations that he went into a coworker's apartment, moved things around, and then pretended to be, you know, the savior because she talked to him about it, because nothing was stolen. And he encouraged her apparently to set up cameras, and they offered to do that. And there was, again, this is all things that have been printed, so I can't verify them other than what we're hearing about, that he then had access to those cameras. So there seems to be some kind of unusual sexual interest or activity. And I do think there was some link for him to these killings. You know, I think, you know, I don't know if he'll ever enlighten us about that. But I think there was. And then the last one, I think for sure there was a thrill component to it, for sure. I mean, whether the sex was involved or not, I definitely think that there was. I definitely think there was a thrill component. A challenge, this idea of creating this crime and, you know, being devious and planning it, being smarter than everybody else, and showing he could commit the perfect crime. He's a PhD criminology student, and he's going to apply all the things he's learned. And, you know, I definitely think that's an easy one.
And then we've got this from Dreamscape. Where does the idea, and then we're going to wrap up in just a few moments, where does the idea that BK, Bryan Kohberger, is a criminal mastermind come from? I'll answer this by saying I think it was put out there, but I think a lot of people like Dr. Johnston have come out and said, look, he was far from infallible, made a lot of mistakes. But how do you see it, Dr. Johnston?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think in his head and in his mind and in his fantasies, he was a criminal mastermind. And then you look at all the mistakes he made with his phone, with his car, with his phone pinging 12 times close by. I mean, leaving the knife sheath at the murder scene. I mean, we could go on and on by the mistakes he made. So I think when reality came home, it clearly illustrated that even though in his head he might think of himself or fantasize himself as this criminal mastermind, he was far from it.
And Judy Sullivan says BK is a hot mess for someone who believes that he's so smart. Shout out to Ansley Green for becoming a YouTube member today. Appreciate that very much. Back to you, Dr. Johnston. Ethan Chapin's mother, Stacy Chapin, appeared on the Today Show. We talked about this a little last week, and talked about how Ethan is, a triplet, and how there's basically just this massive hole left in the family, that he was all about inclusivity. He wasn't really the competitive type because, he's one of three and wanted to always include him. How is this loss magnified by the fact that he is, in fact, a triplet? And by the way, she wrote a children's book called The Boy Who Wore Blue. She had to dress them in blue because they look so similar as little kids. She had to be able to know which one Ethan was. But what about the magnification of this loss because of the fact that he is a triplet?
Well, I immediately think about the loss to his siblings because, when you have three babies that start out, in the womb together, there is a bond that's formed. I think that's hard for people who are not twins. I'm not one, or triplets who are not to really understand that. And so it's almost like as a parent, I think you think of this unit that kind of functions together. And then you see these individuals and how much they love each other and support each other. And so, it becomes more than just three kids, right? It becomes this dynamic between the three of them. And so I think that loss is going to be felt very acutely in this family. And again, especially with the two siblings or the two triplets that are left behind. I think that's so difficult.
Misdemeanor to my earlier muting myself. Carr muted her. She has a voodoo doll of Joel. I would not be surprised. Followed here by Caitlin. The UFO episode last night was so good, and I love the guests. To you, Greg Skordas, the fact that a lot of people, and I promise we're going to wrap, people like Dr. Johnston think that he's an incel. If you're defending him, does that play into your defense at all? Are you just looking with you have your blinders on and you're just looking at the evidence and seeing how you can poke holes in the case?
I think you just have to look at the state's case and come to a theory of what your case is going to be. If it's like they tried in the Lori Vallow case, the state just doesn't have enough evidence, and that was their theory throughout. It didn't fly, it didn't work. But or if it's an alibi in this case, that hey, we're going to prove that in fact our client was not even in the city at the time this occurred. Whatever it is, I mean, we can't sit there as attorneys and try to judge our clients' personalities, or we wouldn't be successful. I mean, it doesn't work that way. They're entitled to a fair trial. They're entitled to be represented vigorously, and they're entitled to have you look at the state's case and poke holes to the extent that it has holes, and put the state to its burden, put the government to what it's supposed to do. So, yeah, I mean, he might be a creepy man. That doesn't mean he's a killer. It just means he makes us a little uncomfortable when we see him. But I don't know that people necessarily felt that before he was a suspect in a quadruple homicide. Now you look back and go, oh, wow, I thought that guy was creepy the whole time I've known him. But I don't know that it's that easy. I just don't. And whatever he is, whatever he's done, he may be a mastermind. If he's acquitted and he did this, then maybe he reached his goal of being a mastermind. Who knows? But if he did this crime and the state's got its act together, he'll regret the day that he was ever there and did this.
Ann Vroom, to you, Tara. It seems like these celebrity perps get inordinately expansive treatment versus regular homicide defendants, huge defense team budgets, motions galore, weeks and weeks of trial. Is that fair? That's a good point. Dr. Johnson's coming to us. We've done a bunch of shows on Lyle and Eric Menendez there in her neck of the woods in San Diego, another pair of high-profile brothers. But, I never thought about it, but the state is spending probably more money than on a typical defendant because this is such a high-profile case. They want it to play out, in their favor. What about the notion that these high-profile defendants are kind of getting special treatment?
Well, I don't know that I would agree. I mean, I think that there's more attention. We hear more about it in, mainstream media, but I think, every time you have a case that has the death penalty on the table as a possibility, you're going to see a lot of motions. You're going to see a lot of footwork in the investigation. You're going to see, some significant, and long trials if it does end up going to trial. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of money spent there. But, ultimately, what are we talking about? We're talking about the possibility of someone not just losing their freedom out and about. We're talking about loss of life. And so I don't think it's inappropriate to expend those funds to make sure that you're doing things, like I said, the right way. It's high stakes. It's the highest stakes you can get with a death penalty case. And so, it does happen. And this one is particularly, we're seeing more of it, obviously, because there's 4 lives that have been lost. There are young lives that have been lost. And people, like I said, are fascinated with this case.
This is sort of an interesting point, Dr. Johnston. In my opinion, what does it matter what the media says or the public? What matters is what the physical evidence shows. The gag order is why there is so much speculation. That's kind of the devil's advocate looking at it from the flip side. Is there an argument to be made that because of the gag order, the speculation is even greater, in your opinion?
I think it's a balance, but I also do think that when there are all these gaps of information, particularly in a high profile case, I think it is very easy for the general public to start filling in those gaps. And so I think that is, there is that kind of balancing act, because we all know, situations where, we should know more than we do, and yet, we don't have that information. So I think there is some merit to saying if we knew more, if we knew what was going on, if we understood how the legal process went better, maybe we wouldn't be filling in the gaps of things that, are not there, are not real.
Nancy Drew, always interesting. Joel, you do have the best guest. Yes, I do. Followed by, I can't even believe I'm putting this up here, but I'm going to embarrass him. That's why I'm doing it. Need some juice, says girl on the bottom is single. Up, my man. She is not single. She's married. And I'm not running a dating service here. So, and I bet you the majority of the women here in the confines of STS Nation would say that trying to ask a woman out in the chat section of a true crime podcast might not be the best way to go, but need some juice. I do like the effort. I will give you that. And I probably would have asked
very
that.
Creative.
Yeah, very creative. You never know. Good work. You never know, but she is married. So, Sarah saying, bottom line is the most important thing is that he receives a fair trial. With that said, Tara Malik, she is a married Idaho licensed attorney practicing in state and federal court in business and commercial litigation. She has experience in both civil and criminal law. Tara, will this go to trial? Let me put you on the spot. Or will some sort of plea deal appear before a trial begins?
Oh, it's way too early to guess on that for me anyways. It's a circumstantial case. Circumstantial cases have a higher probability of going to trial. I'll say that, but we've not seen enough yet as far as what the cards each side is holding right now to be able to say, I wouldn't be able to say whether it's going to trial or not.
Greg Skordas, unfortunately, I'll ask you the same question. He was a Democrat candidate for Utah Attorney General. He's practiced law since '82. He's been doing this for 41 years. His wife wants him to retire today. She wants him to leave his office for the last time. He says, no way. But maybe I'll start a YouTube channel with him as well. Rose Shiflett says, sequester the jury. OJ was acquitted, and that was a televised case. By the way, Adam Bluefire weighing in. Joel, that's true. You went up many points in my estimation. Thank you, Adam, for the extraterrestrial episode. You did a good job. Greg, two things. Do you believe in aliens? And number two, does this go to trial? Oh, let me hang on a sec. Here you go. I'll unmute you. There you go.
I do not believe in aliens. And I think that the chance that there are aliens is pretty slim. I think that the chance that a narcissist like Mr. Kohberger takes a plea bargain and doesn't take this case all the way to the end are pretty slim as well. I mean, he thinks he's something special. He thinks that, and he may be innocent, who knows? And there may be aliens. But I also think that he does think he's the mastermind. I don't see him taking a plea bargain in a case like this.
I'm going to say this just to annoy the defense attorneys, to annoy Ann Taylor, who's probably a very nice woman. Maybe Bryan Kohberger is an alien. How about that? Ski Hat Sarah, Coffee with Carm. Can't wait. It is coming to a Sunday near you soon. Hey, Mona says, we all love Carm regardless of the contentious mommy-son relationship. We have a pretty good relationship. Trust me. We probably hang out too much. Tali says, yay, waiting for Carm in Israel. I rely on my mom probably a hair too much at the age of 53. Taken me a while. I'm always amazed by like animals in the wild who leave their moms at 8 weeks. My Mabel Rose, my puggle, was on a plane at 8 weeks old. She seemed to do fine. 53 years later, still clinging on to my mom. So it's my fault, not hers. Looking at some of these last comments. Let us now reintroduce Dr. JONI Johnston. She is a forensic psychologist who will probably never come back on the show again after experiencing what she just did. She's a private investigator and a crime writer. She's also an Ashley Judd lookalike. She has worked in maximum and medium security prisons. She's worked for the Board of Parole, for the Superior Court of San Diego. She's the author of Serial Killers, 101 Questions True Crime Fans Ask, and is the host of her own YouTube channel, Unmasking a Murder. You better check it out. First question, Dr. Johnston, will you ever come back on this show again? Or are you going to tell everyone to run?
Anytime. I would love it. I really enjoy it.
Thank you. I still can't believe you have a 28 and a 22-year-old. Any final
thoughts? I was
thoughts?
a child bride.
Any final thoughts for STS Nation in terms of, I don't know, kind of how they relate to true crime? We just did a story, by the way, about a young woman in South Korea who was obsessed, fanatical about true crime, and she went out and committed a murder to see how it felt. It was a crazy story. Very meek little woman, like 4'9", under 100 pounds. But for those of us who are true crime fanatics, who are obsessed about this and follow these cases, what advice do you have to all of us?
Kind of froze. Was this directed to me?
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. Just what advice do you have for fanatical true crime fans?
What advice do I have? Keep things in perspective. That's the main thing, I think, is keeping things in perspective, not, getting reality confused with fantasy, and being a good person. And I guess the other part of it is just be safe, right? Be situationally aware and be safe.
Good advice. Judy Sullivan says crime is so abnormal for normal people. That's a good way to put it. Quick note once again, tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern, live. We have Kay and Larry Woodcock, the grandparents of J.J. Vallow, the young boy who was murdered in a horrific manner in that Lori Vallow Daybell case. And Chad Daybell is up next, and sentencing is coming for Lori at the end of July. So please come tune in for that tomorrow night. And Gigi McKelvey, Pretty Lies and Alibis, will be here then as well. Until then, love you, America. Love you, San Diego. Love you, Boise, Idaho. Love you, Salt Lake City, and everyone far and near in between. Until next time, everyone, hang on one sec. Hang on one sec.